Hello, so my name is Emily, and this is going to be my presentation on prions, the deadliest proteins. So what are prions? The name prion comes from the words proteinaceous infectious particle. And so this is a name for an infectious agent, and prions are responsible for diseases that target the brain and the central nervous system, and most prion diseases are usually always fatal. Prion diseases can be contracted by humans and animals. And prions were actually discovered by a man named Stanley B. Prusiner, and he received the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1997 for his discovery of prions. So how do prions work exactly? They're extremely different from something like a virus or a bacteria. So how exactly do they cause disease? Well, prions were discovered to cause disease in the 1980s, and today there's still a ton of research being done. For example, scientists still don't know exactly how these prion diseases are transmitted, like how it's passed on between like animals and humans and stuff. What is known is that prion diseases can be a sporadic illness that comes on, or it can also be genetic. If you inherit the gene for a misfolded prion protein, then you're susceptible to a prion disease, and that's genetic. So a prion is a protein, and it causes normal proteins that are on the surface of cells in the brain to become misfolded. And basically, this starts a chain reaction. So once these misfolded proteins are present in the brain, it causes normal proteins to then become misfolded as well. And the misfolded proteins group together, and then once they group together, they keep damaging more and more brain cells, eventually causing the brain to deteriorate. And so this, in many brains with prion diseases, it causes the brain to take on an appearance of sort of like something like Swiss cheese, because these misfolded prions create holes in the brain where the prions eat away. The disease eats away at the brain cells and then eventually causes death. So these are the most two well-known prion diseases. So on the left we have mad cow disease, which is also known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy. So it's a neurodegenerative disease found in cattle, and this disease is progressive and it attacks their central nervous system. So symptoms include abnormal behavior, trouble walking, weight loss, and later in the course of the disease, the cow actually becomes unable to function normally at all. The time between infection and onset of symptoms is generally about 4 to 5 years, and time from onset of symptoms to death is generally weeks to months. And this can also be spread to humans. Humans can't contract it directly, but if a human were to eat the meat of an infected cow, then they would contract mad cow disease. So the second disease we have over here is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and this is also known as subacute spongiform encephalopathy. This is a neurocognitive disorder that is caused by prions. Its early symptoms include memory problems, behavioral changes, poor coordination, and visual disturbances. Later on in the course of the disease, the symptoms then include dementia, involuntary movements, blindness, weakness, and coma. And this disease progresses quickly and usually causes death within 1 year of contracting the illness. About 70% of people die within the year of contracting CJD. So why should you care? Why are these mysterious proteins so important and so scary? Well, first of all, there is still so much unknown about prions. The diseases that I had mentioned before in the presentation are a group of diseases known as transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. And these diseases are well known about prions, but this is the only thing about prions that is well known. Scientists still don't know how normal proteins misfold and what exactly causes the normal proteins to misfold. And technically speaking, proteins should not be able to infect other proteins. They're not living and they have no DNA. Additionally, Stanley Prusiner, the biologist who discovered prions, it took him 10 years to isolate a single protein that was causing CJD, my bad. It took him 10 years to isolate the protein, and then it took even longer to establish the idea of prions. So that just goes to show like how much research has to go into prions and how much scientists still don't know. And today there's still research being done. Next, prion diseases such as CJD and mad cow disease, they're always fatal and there is no cure. So there's a way of diagnosing prion diseases, but there's no way to cure. And unfortunately, people and animals who contract prion diseases, they die. And so next, prions are non-living and they do not contain DNA, as I mentioned before. Therefore, they cannot be killed like something like a bacteria or a parasite could. They can survive being boiled, they can survive being disinfected with the proper chemicals, and they can still infect brains for years after proper treatment and proper procedures done by hospitals and labs. So that just goes to show how dangerous these prions actually are. So what recent advancements on prions are there? First, we have very low oral exposure to prions of brain or saliva origin can transmit chronic wasting disease. And this is an article, and the goal was to better understand CWD infection in nature, and they studied oral exposures of deer to very low doses of CWD prions, and also examined whether the frequency of exposure or prion source may influence infection and pathogenesis. So basically, chronic wasting disease is a disease caused by prions that is found in deer. And so the minimum infectious dose required to induce CWD in deer remains unknown. And so this study, I mentioned their goal was to better understand CWD. So they did a study using deer, and they exposed these deer to very low concentrations of CWD prions. And what they found was that low dose exposures to prions of brain or saliva origin prolonged the time from inoculation to first detection of infection. However, once it was established that these deer were infected, there was no difference in disease pathogenesis. So what these studies say is that the CWD minimum infectious dose is extremely low. And CWD infection appears to conform more with a threshold than a cumulative dose dynamic. So next we have this article on highly infectious prions are not directly neurotoxic. So as I've said before, prions are these assemblies of misfolded cellular prion protein that are found on the surface of brain cells, and they cause rapidly lethal neurodegenerative diseases both in humans and animals. And for a very long time, scientists have thought that these prions are neurotoxic themselves. However, recent developments have begun to disprove this theory, and so this study takes pure prions from mice brains. And they did this study using the prions, and they were able to prove that infectious prions are not directly neurotoxic. So that was all I had to say on prions. This is now the end of my presentation, and these are the resources that I used. Yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.